So, Fierce and Dead's YouTube channel. I'm here with my friend Chris from the mighty London Prog Gigs, and we're just sort of talking about, Chris, how did you get into music? What was the first band?
How did I get into music? My household wasn't interested in music. My dad didn't like music at all. I think the only thing he liked was comic songs, which were popular in the war and such like. He liked Lonnie Donegan, but not Rock Island Line. He liked Does Your Chewing Gum Lose Its Flavour on the Bedpost Overnight? Funny stuff like that. So he didn't like music. My mum gave it up because she liked it, but he didn't. But when I was 14, I went to have a holiday in Canada and my older cousin, who was 19 at the time, introduced me basically to the rock music of the early 70s. I remember him being appalled that I had not heard of Led Zeppelin. I was 12 or something, but so I found out about them after. But it was my cousin Steve that first introduced me. And when I came home, I went out and bought a radio and a cassette recorder and started recording the top 20 from the Radio 1 shows and stuff like that. So, pretty common experience, I think, for guys of my age.
Was it always the sort of proggy, progressive stuff, or the sort of that sort of thing?
Well, as has been spoken about often on Facebook and social media, back in those days, there weren't such rigid divisions between types of music.
Good.
Progressive rock went in the same. I mean, Black Sabbath and Yes and Genesis were all in the same category. They were all rock music. Yeah, there were progressive rock bands and there were heavy metal bands. As we called it, heavy metal. But then Status Quo were a heavy metal band, and so were Black Sabbath. I mean, as I say, the divisions weren't there to that extent.
I have to say, I'm not a massive fan of those genre divisions. I mean, I like the bands who can be, you listen to a 70s Led Zeppelin album, and it had a bit of prog, bit of folk on it, bit of metal, bit of, something fast, something slow. And I think one of the problems I've got with a lot of modern music is that it's, we are this sort of band and we will produce this sort of song over and over again until we're all so bored that we want to cry when we hear it. But that's what, they think. I don't know if bands think it will sell or they just get into a rut of just making the same album over and over again. But
depends a lot, doesn't it, whether they're doing it for fun or whether they're established bands that are doing it for money. Those guys might want to keep throwing the same stuff out because it's their living. People who are doing it for their passion and are less concerned about you can't not be concerned about making a living, but you know what I mean. It's always been an issue, hasn't it? Back in the day when albums were, when you could make money on albums, what do you do when you've made a great selling album? Do you make another one that sounds the same and get people bored with the fact that you're doing the same sort of thing, or do you progress it a little bit? That's that word, progress, isn't it? And then piss off your existing fan base and maybe not find a new fan base. It's an argument that's been going on for 40 years plus and will probably go on forever.
I think that's the thing. I mean, whether you're, I think if you can I think you've just got to make the records that you feel passionate about. But a lot of the time, a lot of bands, they're not even passionate about doing music at all. They're just stuck in. They have to keep putting an album out every 2 years to keep everything rolling, and I can sympathise with that. I can, a lot of these bands that are still going. It's like you talk to the guys, and the last thing they want to talk about. We've done a lot of gigs with a lot of bands, and the last thing they want to talk about is guitar pedals. You know what I mean? That's not their interest. They're into golf, or they want to build a new conservatory, or. You know what I mean? But the last thing they want to do is sit and talk to some nerd like me about guitar pedals or, Voivod B-sides or stuff. You know what I mean? It's like, I think it just becomes a job for some people, doesn't it? And
well, interesting you should say that. I mean, I told you about how I first got into music back in the day, but I had a career, I had kids, I was out of the music scene for a long, long time. One of the things that got me back into it was when I went on Cruise to the Edge. Which is the Yes cruise. I'm sure everybody's heard of it. This was only the second one, so it was some years ago, 6-7 years ago, maybe something like that.
Yeah, it's quite a long time it's been going now.
But it massively reinvigorated my interest in the whole scene. But even at the time, it was incredibly apparent the difference between the old guys who were churning out the stuff for an audience that wanted to see them, and the old guys, frankly, still old guys mostly, who was still really, really into it. And you could tell by who you saw watching other people's gigs.
Yeah,
Right? And I would see people like John Young of Life Signs who would go to, I kept seeing him and chatting to him, looking at other people's gigs, whereas the Yes guys and people like that, you just never saw them. They would sit in their dressing rooms and stuff, and they wouldn't mingle or anything like that, apart from the sort of paid presentations.
I suppose for those guys, though, I mean, the last thing they want to see is another progressive rock band. Is having been, it's like the last thing it's like the work. If you work in any field, if you're a plumber, the last thing you want to go is look at toilets on your day off, is it? You know what I mean? It's like.
To be fair, I have a lot of sympathy. There's no way Steve Howe could walk around the ship without being fucking mobbed. Pardon me, without being mobbed. And so, yes, I know it's not so easy. Whereas Dave from IO Earth was around all the time chatting about everything from anybody who was there. But Dave from IO Earth is not a mega famous rock star. I mean, the nature of fame, Matt, you must find this yourself when you go to gigs now. You are in a circle, in a small pond, as it were. You can walk in, I'm sure you can walk into an audience or to see somebody else and people will go, Matt, hello, mate, how are you? Want to see you, want to talk about Fears and the Dead and stuff. But walk out in the street, you're probably not recognised.
No, it's lovely. I don't want to be recognised. I mean, I can experience it tangentially at the odd gig or something, but yeah, it's not something that very often interferes in my life. Thankfully.
Imagine being that all the time.
Yeah, it must be very awkward. I mean, the thing also, I think 70s rock stars were treated a different way to the way bands are treated now. Whereas I think there's more of a you sort of mate to the people in the other who listen to the music rather than being put on some sort of pedestal like it was in the 70s. To me, I mean, I remember when I told this story the other day, but when I met Jimmy Page when I worked at Selfridges, he came into the shop I was working in the record department at Selfridges, and Jimmy Page came in, and I froze. I couldn't talk to him. I was like, Jimmy Page. It was like Superman or Darth Vader. Yeah. It was impossible for me to relate to him as a person. To me, he was an absolute god. But I'm not going to get that from the bass player from IO Earth. I mean, no offense to the bass player from IO Earth, but he was they're people like your mates. You know what I mean? And
I met Robert Plant back in the day. I think about early 80s, something like that. He was charming. He struck me as being very old. I suspect he was about 35.
Well, that was ancient.
He was at the time, and very, very pleasant. But I think Ringo Starr or somebody famously said, you can sign 20 or 30 autographs and go eventually, shit, I'm sorry, I've had enough. I'm not doing anymore. And that one person who didn't get his autograph signed will go onto Twitter or Facebook and say, what a bastard that bloke is. He didn't, social media's made a change.
There was a guy, I was breaking down my gear. This is me doing a solo show at Cambridge Rock Festival. It was on Fest, I think it was Cambridge Rock Festival. But I think it was Cambridge. One of those sort of venues anyway. Somewhere you got a big crowd of people. I was putting all my gear away. And some guy was talking to me. He was really nice. And I was really talking to him, trying to interact. But I had to get all my gear off because the stage manager had told me off. And I remember the next day, Twitter, oh, he didn't want to talk to me. And I was like, it wasn't that I didn't want to talk to you. I had a man shouting at me to move my gear, and I had to go and put it backstage. And I think people forget that it's a kind of a working environment when you're doing gigs. It's like, I have to, basically, if you're in the role of a support band or, your job is to get off as quick as you possibly can and act respectfully and politely and say, thank you very much. Right. If they want a 20-minute set, you do a 19-minute, 50-second set, and you're off stage on time. You say, thank you very much. You go and thank everybody. You're polite. Buy the sound man the drinks. Don't talk to the main band. Only if they want you to. And then just thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And that's the way you deal with it. But if you can't mess about in those situations. You have to act as professional as possible.
You've got to be professional about it. And if people, people are people, you know, you're going to get, most people will understand it, but everywhere you go, you will get somebody. And that's just life, you know, we know
Yeah,
that.
I mean, so what led you to start? So after you came back from Cruise to the Edge, is that when you sort of started into your odyssey of prog discovery?
Yeah, pretty much. I hadn't been particularly experienced with Facebook, but when I came back from Facebook, I was really supercharged in my interest
That's awesome.
back in live music. And to be fair, and for all the criticism that Facebook gets, a lot of it deservedly so, but nonetheless, in my opinion, without Facebook, the current prog scene, and prog by which I mean a big umbrella,
Broad, yeah.
wouldn't exist. I mean, you know, every day somebody, some boomer usually, will join Facebook and discover suddenly,
Good.
my God, somebody else likes Gentle Giant. You know, I mean, you thought that you were the only person for
But
years, and suddenly you're connected with people all over the world.
I think that Facebook is rubbish apart from the groups. I
Yeah,
think the groups are awesome because they're like old school forums.
yeah, I've
You know,
exactly, absolutely right. I'm
I think
100% with you.
the general feed and most of Facebook I'm not interested in at all. But the groups are
Yeah,
fantastic. London
yeah,
Prog Gigs, Prog Magazine readers, all the post rock ones, the stoner rock groups we're all members of. There's experimental ambient stuff. There's other stuff I'm interested in, like horror movies and and the Fierce the Dead's Facebook group is really great for interacting with
it
people.
is.
There's a nice sense of community. There's a real sense of community. I think Big Train, one of the real innovators to getting that going. They've got a brilliant Facebook group. But so, when did you start London Prog Gigs then?
Well, just, I mean, you mentioned Big Train, and the Big Train were massively influential to me, actually. Just after Folk Cruise to the Edge, I joined the Big Train group, partially because I realised that I went to school with their keyboards player, so that was
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, and my story is that I introduced Danny Manners to the love of Gentle Giant, which is probably the only prog band he actually likes. So it's ironic that he joined possibly Britain's number one prog band of that particular ilk, which is quite exciting. But I learned over a few years about all of that level of music that is just non-existent to the mainstream media. And it took a bit of time, but after a while, I started going to see the bands again, having had 20 years or so of only going to a band 2 or 3 times a year, only a band that I would know. Gabriel I would see every time he played, that sort of thing, but normally in the big venues and stuff. Suddenly to start going to the small venues again, the guys, places you play at, the Hope and Anchor, the Black Heart, you know, I'm talking London
Small,
area,
small
obviously, because I
venue.
specialise in London, but the same, you know, the venues, there are some very good venues around around the country.
Yeah.
Fewer of them. I mean, up until COVID, we've been blessed in London by the number of gigs that we have. But to me, suddenly it was real again. Suddenly it was, I didn't mention to you that when I was at university, I was social secretary for a year, which was
Oh yeah, you were booking gigs, weren't you?
exactly, yeah, I was a gig
I
booker
used
back
to
in the
told me
days.
about that, yeah.
So, you know, I mean, I had Pretenders when they were number one. I had Hawkwind. I sat Hawkwind on, and I went to see Hawkwind a few months ago for their 50th anniversary. Who the hell would have thought of that? I had Caravan. I had a real mix of what had already been. I mean, booking Caravan, I got some stick for, because Caravan, you know, they're at least 4 years old. That's behind ancient, all these ancient bands you're booking, Chris, and all of that sort of stuff. But then, you know, Simple Minds, well, Simple Minds are ancient now, but I was booking current and recently, you know, past stuff.
Do you remember in like I mean I've reading the old prog issues, the old Enemy and stuff.
Yeah.
And like I remember they were saying like all the bands from the 70s when I got into music in the late 80s, you know, late 80s, early 90s, you know, 89, 90s when I probably got into music, and then, you know, I was along for grunge and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I remember them saying then that, you know, oh, these ancient bands like Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple, and they're probably like 40.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Well, you know, when you're 15 or 19 or something, 5 years ago, you were a kid. So
yeah,
5 years is a long time when you're that
um,
old. When you're your age and my age and such, like, 5 years is just a very, very small portion of your life, and it no longer seems so long. But again, you know, the long tail, they call it, the fact that okay, we don't want to go into a streaming conversation and the pros and cons of it, but one thing that you do find now is the fact that so much is accessible. In the day, you wanted to find out about a band, there wasn't much to do. There was a little bit of you bought an album, maybe, if you could afford an album, maybe one a week or 1 or 2 weeks, and you play it to death. These days, you see anything you're interested in, and people who do streaming can find the back works. And I believe that there is an advantage to people whose careers are being resuscitated by the fact that people can find them now. Okay, being listened to on YouTube or streaming services doesn't give you any money, but it can reinstigate, you know, a new audience and stuff. And you do find, or people coming across the old audience again. How many times do I see in other people's timelines? Yeah, I mean, you were saying that people, it's best places in groups. It's true. I fully agree with you.
Yeah.
People's own individual timelines. But even so, sometimes somebody will put some. I went to see Caravan again, but some of their friends who aren't into music there'll always be a comment saying, "Oh my God, are they still going?" You know, because people don't know.
I remember when we were talking about doing the Hawkwind gigs we did. And we love playing with Hawkwind, and they're a band. They're still really into it. I mean, they're the real deal. Hawkwind are real deal. I mean, you know, I got
brilliant to hear. Dave Brock looked incredibly old when I saw him, and he was 35.
he is fit as anything. He's unbelievable, Dave Brock.
He was on that documentary the other day. Did you see it? The one in Rockfield Studios.
Yeah, no, he's you know, he's fit. He's got years left in him. Dave Brock has. I hope.
Well, I'm jealous of your association with him, mate.
He was really nice to us, and yeah, and then we were going to do some more shows with them, I think, but obviously then the event happened, and
yeah,
because Hawkwinds were going to do a big festival in the
the Hawkfest, yeah.
Hawkfest, and we were talking to them about doing that, and then all this happened, and it didn't happen. But yeah, Hawkwind, you know, they've been really kind to us. And Dave Brock's been really, you know, Dave Brock's apparently really likes our stuff. And when he spoke to us, he was such a nice guy. They were all, I can't say enough good things about Hawkwind. They're just lovely. And they're brilliant. They're a really good band. Really like, just still into it. And every time we played with Hawkwind, I always watched the whole set because I just loved it. You know what I mean? But yeah, sorry, we're going on a tangent, a Hawkwind-based tangent, aren't we? But, yeah.
It's a long, deep hole to get into, that one.
It's poor, blimey. So I think you're right with the timeline. People, I think it's just people a lot of the time, you know, they're rediscovering the passions they had like years ago, and I think it's and I love it when, like I say, someone like yourself, you discovered all the new stuff as well. I think that's brilliant. And
that's less rare, less common, I should say. There's an awful lot of people who discover their old stuff and go, "Hey, I can listen to the old stuff again," and are happy to do so and chat. And this is one of the arguments against some of the Facebook groups we're talking about. There are some people who really just want to relive their favourite bands of their teens and early 20s.
It's glory years.
Yeah, exactly. But it's regretfully rarer that people go, "Hey, wow, there's a lot of new great stuff around. This is really, really interesting." And you find, if you're one of these sadly minority people like myself, you actually spend most of your time nowadays listening to new stuff. I seldom play the classic stuff.
It's a weird one because new rock music, because I remember when I was a kid, I listened to all new stuff, right? Rock music wise. But I think people getting into rock music, like people who are teenagers getting into rock music, and they are instantly hit with the classics, the Led Zeppelin, the Guns N' Roses. You know, there's so much. The catalogue is so vast. And like you say, with streaming as well.
And it's accessible, yeah, they can.
Whereas, you know, when I was a kid, I had an Iron Maiden album, and then I bought a Guns N' Roses album, then I had an Anthrax album, then I had a Celtic Frost album, and then I had a Led Zeppelin album, and I had to be very careful which Led Zeppelin album I bought to get the right one, because it might be crap. I had to get a good one. So I remember buying Led Zeppelin 4, because it had Stairway to Heaven on it, and then Houses of the Holy. So you had to, you know, I had 5 records. Yeah, and I got a double Black Sabbath greatest hits. And I think I wore that out. because I loved it so much. I loved Black
You
Sabbath.
know every track on every album.
Because I had to, because I didn't, because, and even if I bought it and I didn't really like it, well, I'd spent 16 quid on it. It was a lot of money in them days. So I've got to make
Exactly,
sure I get my money's worth.
but did you not have, I'm sure you've had the experience that you listen to an album, you get back, and some of the tracks you go, oh, that's not so good. But eventually, some of those tracks that didn't hit you the first time became your favourite tracks.
And that's one of the problems with like discovering music these days, because a lot, like I say, the stuff that a lot of my favourite bands, your King Crimsons, Cardiacs, obviously we've just been talking about Cardiacs, but those sort of bands and Voivod, the first time you hear them, you go, what's that? That's just the noise. That's not even a proper. But the more you listen to it, the more you discover it, and I've talked a bit like Gentle Giant, another band that's a classic of, the first time you hear it, you go, what?
Big fan.
Mahavishnu Orchestra, it's, first time you hear Mahavishnu, it's just a wall of noise. But they put in like same, someone who's into death metal and grindcore and black metal as well. The first time you hear a lot of that stuff, it's like, this is so intense. You have to listen to, like, no one hears a Carcass song for the first time and goes, oh, I'm just a Carcass fan. You have to really learn how the genre works and how and then you'll hear the deep melodic innovation in there because you've dug into it. But so much stuff you have to spend time with.
And it's very, very easy to go click next track.
And this is the problem with, I've kind of found doing the stuff we do. It's like, basically the bands that do really well but now are bands that sound like somebody else, but 5% different. So we're like Genesis, but we're with vocal. We've got a couple of female backing vocals, and instead of the Mellotron and one tron, we use a Hammond or something like that. That's the extent of the innovation. And there's a lot of really, really good craftsmen. However, there are bands like Big B Train who are kind of working in a traditional progressive context, but they write really good songs. They're brilliant. I mean, when I saw them live and that brass band came in, I was a bit, there's something in my eye.
You were at that first King's Place gig, weren't you, that they did?
Absolutely brilliant.
I saw you there. We didn't know each other then, but I remember seeing you and thinking, oh, that's Matt from Fears of the Dead. So about that.
I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and and they're lovely guys as well. So there's people who can take a classic form and then do something that's so brilliant with it, it works. But also, I think for people coming back into the music scene, you're never going to hear me slagging anyone off and say anything, because I just don't think it's constructive. But I think what I'd hope is that people will stray a bit further from the music they listened to when they were kids. But I'm just as bad, because if I hear a band that sounds like Husker Du or Iron Maiden, it's just comforting. It's just, and especially at a period in the world's history like this, where obviously things are a bit heavy out there, and you want something that's a bit comforting. A bit comfort music.
There's room for it all. We are working in a very, very tiny area of music. I was looking at the streams not long ago. I was watching the Trinity stream, and there were 400 or 500 people watching it live, and I know a lot of people have watched it. Steve Gould's brilliant, does fantastic work. The amount of people watching that worldwide was a few hundred live. The Led Zeppelin O2 reunion gig from 2007 was on as well. I think that had 150,000 streams. So it shows that people are interested in what they know. I found before I got back into music, I was guilty of this. I would listen to a new album by a band that I used to like back in the day and think, oh, that's not as good as it used to be. Or I'd listen to a new band and say, oh, that reminds me of this, or this reminds me of that. I'm much less bad about that now. These days, you can see influences, but everybody had influences. You listen to Led Zeppelin and you can go, oh yeah, that's Muddy Waters there.
Yeah, definitely.
So to pretend that anybody invented, apart from Tommy Iommi invented heavy metal perhaps or whatever, but everything's based on something that came before.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's the thing. Everything you do, it's got roots in other things. And I think really what's generally perceived as originality is largely a juxtaposition of one influence in a different context. So you might put a bit of thrash metal in a prog song, in like a lot of the prog metal bands did. People go, "Oh,
Yeah.
this is really innovative." And it's like, well, they've just sort of taken a bit of Metallica and put it in a Dream Theater, in a Rush song, like sort of Dream Theater would do. I'm not saying be disrespectful to Dream Theater, but that's kind of, they recontextualise those influences. So, I think bands have just got to keep trying new stuff. But yeah, so in terms of like the live scene, so yeah, I was going to ask you, obviously someone who's got a bit of an insight into the, you're always somebody, I quite often message you and ask you questions, don't I, about,
You do, it's great.
about the scene, just because I know your stuff, and you're out there and you see how it all works more than I do, really. I mean, I go to quite a few gigs, but not as many as you. What do you think, the implications of what's been happening with COVID, and obviously it's very sad, so many people lost their lives, but the implications on the industry is that when will things open up? And like, someone who's a bit of an expert, who's there all the time, what do you think?
Oh, well, there's no simple answer to that, because there are so many different types of gigs. There are so many different types of music. There are so many different countries that have different regulations. It depends exactly what you mean by gigs, for example. In Germany, there are small gigs, small by which I mean up to 1,000 people, are happening now. There's an interesting YouTube video of a thrash metal band who did a gig just literally last week. I think it was in Switzerland, but they're a German band. Very interesting to see how they are doing it with some degree of awareness of the COVID situation. But most of the boomers, I suspect, watching it would go there, oh, well, I'm not going to that. They're all sort of standing quite close to each other and stuff. So a lot of it depends on where you are. It also depends on what your own personal fear, risk level, or maybe your real risk level, or how you feel about it. One thing I see a lot on London Prog Gigs group, stuff like that, is I will post something about the resurgence of gigs, but a lot of people, and I'm talking about the late Gen Xers and the early boomers and stuff, really, but time and time again I see, interesting, but I'm not going till there's a vaccine. And I kind of feel that myself too, but
it's understandable. Yeah, I'm not one to criticize anybody's viewpoint on it. I think it's understandable. And I think everybody's got to look at their personal situation. I mean, even if they're well themselves, is what we call well, but they might have somebody at home if they're worried about. They might have somebody, they might be worried about, I'm going to go and visit my mum the week after. I don't want to give it to my mum. You might, there's all sorts of very complex, you've got to think, next week I might be going to see somebody who's vulnerable. I might be able, it's a very, very complex situation. I think
it really, really is. And yet it is undoubtedly true that the younger you are, the less personally vulnerable you are to your own health.
Yeah.
So, and looking at the videos of the gigs and things that have taken place, I'm not saying they're all young people, but it's also been pointed out that prog gigs tend not to have a big audience, but it depends what you mean by big. When you played the Hope and Anchor, the last time we met, were you playing the Hope and Anchor, which is what, 80 people or 80 something?
80 people, sold out in the morning, that did. So,
yeah, I can believe it. But it's crowded in that little room downstairs.
Now, I wouldn't put a gig on like that now, because I'd feel guilty that I could possibly hurt. I mean, as an artist,
Sorry.
My principal concern is I don't want to hurt anybody. And if somebody came to see us and, got sick after that, I mean, I'd feel awful. So I wouldn't put a gig on like that. I mean, that's why we've just wiped the slate for this year. We haven't got anything this year.
No, I understand that, and I absolutely agree and sympathise. But 80 people in the Hope and Anchor was a crowded little room.
Yeah,
80 people in the Dome in Tufnell Park would be a financial disaster if you were for the guys there. But nonetheless,
it's a financial disaster, but it's a social distancing dream, isn't it?
Yeah,
You could
absolutely.
actually socially distance it.
Absolutely right. I mean, I was looking at the Bedford in Balham for potentially putting a gig together next April.
Hmm.
This would be for Coma Rossi, who we had a gig for the
Yeah,
Indian rock band, who we had a gig in March, had to fail. They're hoping maybe things will be better next April. And I thought, you know, that the Bedford could be done as a cafe sort of layout. So, you know, social distancing for 100 people or something in a place like that would be possible. Whether people would go, you still got to share toilets. Are bars going to be open, or is it table service? I mean, for me, my favourite position to watch a band is a small live gig where I'm standing at the bar, or because I like to lean against it, keep my pint there, and keep an eye on what the band's doing. That's like the last thing that's going to be possible. So, you know, a life-changing thing for me there.
There was talk of someone costed it out the other day, or they said it's going to have to be 250 quid to change the to clean the toilets, deep clean the toilets, and then you're going to have to hire the venue. You're going to need additional service staff to serve each table. Your capacity would be reduced from, say, you had a 300 person venue, you'd have 25 to 30 people in it, and so you'd have to charge more for the tickets.
Yeah.
Everyone would have to have a specific seat. It's not sounding very rock and roll to me.
It's not. Ticket prices are an interesting one. On the smaller gigs in London, the ones I mostly frequent, anything above 10 or 15 quid is quite expensive for a gig.
Exactly, yeah.
When you're looking at the big 70s giants, then, you know, they're charging 60, 70, 80, 100 quid plus and all of that sort of stuff. That's a different sort of figure. But, you know, in this, you could hire the Hope and Anchor and have 80 people there and charge, I can't remember what you charged, Matt. Was it 15 quid? It was incredible value, whatever it was.
12 quid, I think. We try and keep the prices low.
Exactly, but nonetheless, you end up making some money. But if you are hiring a big venue for 4 or 5 times the fee, then you're going to be losing money to play.
The numbers definitely don't add up for us to do gigs at the moment. I know that. I mean, you just, you know, I mean, as a you know, exercise, I did think about how you do it, and it's, you know, our draw across the country is probably top end in London is probably about 150, 200 people, whereas in Manchester, Bristol, probably 100 to 150 people. So, you know, like probably 3 or 4 places in the UK we can draw enough people to make it worth us playing, right?
Yeah.
But with the new rules in place, and also there's 2 factors at play. It's like with the new rules at place make it virtually economically impossible, and secondly, I don't think there's the will to go. I don't think people want to go.
Yeah, that's the point. It depends on the people we're talking about. The older proggers, the guys who are very vocal on Facebook about how they're never going to stream, they only will buy albums, they'll only buy them direct from the websites, not through Amazon. People are very, very keen to make sure the band is getting paid. Those guys may well be prepared to pay more for tickets than they've been used to, but they're also the guys who probably aren't going to go because
a lot of them are quite vulnerable, aren't they? That's why. I mean,
as I say,
not being disrespectful. If you were going to see Hawkwind in 1972, I mean, you're not going to be not going to be a young person now, and that's not being disrespectful to Hawkwind fans.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how old Dave is. He's 72, 74, something like that. Nick Turner, who still playing, was playing with Hawklords. I saw him at the HOH at Shepherd's Bush. He's 80. Will we ever see Nick Turner play again now? I don't know. But hey, I mean, you know, and on the other hand, you've got Tim, who died at 59. You know, I mean,
Tragic.
There's no guarantees in how long you get.
As I learned myself, you know, last couple of years when I got sick, you know, you're throwing the dice every morning. Every time you wake up, you know, you've won the lottery, haven't you? Really, because you're still alive and you can still keep going.
Well, wake-up calls are very, very useful as long as they don't kill you. You know, if you get better, then
that's useful, yeah. But, I mean, you know, like I say with Tim today, that was, you know, heartbreaking. That was just
As I say, It was on the cards, of course, but it doesn't make it any less,
No,
as opposed to Bowie, who like, whoa, you had no idea.
We didn't know, did we? I mean, he kept it quiet. He wasn't well, and yeah.
Left us with some terrific parting gifts, though, didn't he? So,
Yeah, I mean, imagine trying to make music when you know that you're not well and stuff. Well, I do know what it's like. So,
yeah, well, there you go, mate.
So, and I think with me, when we're currently making the Fierce and the Dead album, we've got 85 songs for it. And
the last triple album, then, mate.
I was going to say the last time we made one, I think we had 9. So that period of being ill was probably quite quite useful in some ways, I suppose. That it gave you,
shall we say, silver lining rather than useful.
Yeah, I suppose so. But, so when do you? I think the factors you got to play is there going to be a vaccine? Do people believe that it's safe to come out? Do they believe the government when they tell people, it's safe to go to gigs? Do they believe?
Oh, safe.
What's safe? What is safe?
Safe means different things to different people. From the government's point of view, they don't want. New Zealand had a 22,000 sports event happen 2 days ago, but they haven't got any COVID in New Zealand. But they are at the far-flung edge of the world, and they are able to close their borders sensibly because it's a destination you can go to. Europe can't do that. Nonetheless, Germany has got much better figures than we have, which is why gigs have existed. From the UK's point of view, or from the government's point of view, if you're trying to legislate on this sort of thing, as opposed to whether people want to go, you don't want... Big venues are less safe because you might get a super spreader. There's a very interesting thing that the Germans are doing today, actually. They've just announced it. They're doing a scientific study of how the virus or how viruses can spread in a large concert hall situation. And they've got all sorts of equipment. They're measuring, they're checking that everybody is virus. They're only taking volunteers. They're checking everybody is virus free before they're allowed in. And there's various safety restrictions and stuff, but they've got all sorts of gear so they'll be able to run a gig. They are running a gig, and they'll be able to get information about what the hotspots are, where the most safe places are and stuff, which will be very useful. But this is for seated large venues. This will be very helpful to know if anything can happen at the O2 again, for example, or when the Royal Albert Hall will be able to open.
It's hard to imagine when those places will be able to return, though, don't it? I mean, I can imagine an acoustic night with table service, with one performer on the stage. That I can see a logic to that.
Folk clubs and jazz clubs will be back then.
Jazz clubs and acoustic clubs, yeah. I mean, I could imagine, but I can't imagine 250 people watching Knife World. That seems impossible to me. So
well, that depends again on what you consider risky. From the government's point of view, if there's one spreader among 250 people, then those 250 people, maybe some people will pick it up. That's not the end of the world from the overall society point of view. What you don't want is 22,000 people managing to pick something up, because so if it's safe, there's a different question if it's safe for you as opposed to if it's relatively safe for society. Now, if you're more concerned about whether it's safe for you, no, a small standing gig, eating in a restaurant, whatever. What level of safety are we all prepared to accept? Now, we may have to redo our thinking on this. A year ago, you didn't not go to a gig because you might catch flu.
No.
And yet, we all know that thousands of people die in England every year of flu. So we didn't not go because, oh my God, I'm not going, I might catch flu. No, and if you saw somebody, one of those guys who used to go around wearing surgical gloves and not talking and not shaking hands, they used to be eccentric. Okay, nowadays we think actually, they bloody knew exactly what they were doing. But
last time I went out, I was wearing surgical gloves because I was going to the hospital. Surgical gloves and a mask.
Well, there you go. But I mean,
it felt weird. It felt.
It felt weird. You looked weird. You probably were weird.
I felt like I was a wrong un, you know, some
Yeah,
strange fetishist with rubber gloves on and a funny mask, you know, it was just
yeah,
weird.
no, absolutely.
But
You know,
when
it is difficult.
I think the thing's going to, a lot of it's going to be legislation, a lot of it's going to be where the R rate is, and the other factor is whether people want to go back. And I think for some gigs, I think with the proggy sort of stuff, I think the audience is probably going to be slightly reluctant because they're a little bit older, a bit more
I
worried.
tend to agree, particularly if you're talking about classic sort of prog. But if you're looking at sort of prog metal, psych stoner stuff, have you been to any psych gigs
I know it's a
recently? I
younger
mean,
audience, isn't it?
the young audiences, full, 2, 3, 400 people venues, full of people under 30, and you're listening to stuff that sounds like Pink Floyd from 1968, and none of the sorry, but you know, people
Yeah,
there have any idea that they're listening to psychedelic music that was been around for 50 years. Those guys, I believe, will be chomping at the bits, and they'll be happy to go to gigs. They won't, if they happen to have old grandmothers and stuff, that may be. But I'm saying that for non-traditional prog gigs, I do believe there's a massive, hey, listen, you only need to go down and see the people who go down to the beach and stuff to see there's a whole section out of our society, the people who refuse to wear masks and people who don't do social distancing. There's a load of people who don't really care or believe or worry so much about COVID. And those people, yeah, they'll go straight back to gigs if they were gig goers.
So do you think? I think so because if you look at the average age, I mean, like when we played Freak Valley Festival, for example, probably the average age there was about 30, 35. So that big one we did out there. I would imagine Prognosis in the Netherlands, that the age group that go to like see Catatonia and Enslaved and bands like that, probably about 35 average age.
Maybe
Older
a
people.
touch older, something like that. You're basically talking on the cusp between the millennials and Generation X.
So yeah, your prog metal gigs, Hawkwind gigs and the Space Rock guys. You get a lot of older fans there, but some younger ones as well.
Yeah,
Whereas a lot of the sort of classic prog bands might struggle to get the audience out, but
quite agree.
I think a lot of the artists won't want to tour as well. I think
Yeah, absolutely. As you say yourself, you're not going to want to stand on stage and sing, and potentially, and you can't sing without a little bit of spittle coming out now and again. Oh God, I was thinking about you were the punk bands I used to go and see, where it was a sort of badge of honour for the singer to have as much bob on their face as possible. Can you just seems like a science fiction story, doesn't it? That sort of thing would be possible.
it ever happened? Yeah, it seems bizarre, doesn't it? But
But you're not going to want to be potentially infecting an audience in front of you.
I mean, I remember going to see metal bands and going moshing down the front with the mosh and Slayer and stuff, and coming out with my glasses all smashed up, seeing the Dead Kennedys. And I remember this woman, this people staged over on my head, and I remember being stuck up against this lady with a spiked leather jacket and this Dead Kennedys gig, and these spikes all in my hat, these marks from the spikes in my arm, you know, from playing. But
When was it? I would love the Dead Kennedys. Back at Holiday in Cambodia was one of my favourite singles, but that was a long time back. I didn't realise they carried on for so long.
about 15 years ago. It was without Jello Biafra. It was an awesome show. It really, East Bay Ray's one of my favourite guitar players ever. He was awesome. And just to see Dead Kennedys again, you know what I mean? It was just such a incredible thing. But it was brilliant. It was at the Electric Ballroom. But yeah, it was great. And they still tour now and again, and they're still
I'm
working.
delighted. I haven't been following them for a long time, but you know.
Play again, Chris. We'll have to go.
You're on. Okay, it's a date for one day.
One day, yeah, when things return to normal. So, I think as a sort of conclusion, I mean, I think people of all ages want to go and see music. I think you're right saying that younger people will probably be the first ones to go back, with a general phasing of the older audience. And I think a lot of its context. I mean, like I say, I mean, I think it's going to be a while before people want to go and sit in the basement of the Hope and Anchor with Ram like this, you know what I mean?
Could be, but there is nonetheless good news around, or potentially good news on vaccines. You know, just yesterday there's 2 types of vaccine. Okay, it's. I think a lot of people are thinking that there's going to be a vaccine. It's going to be a magic panacea, and I think that's wrong. You shouldn't get over enthusiastic. But if we can get a vaccine to the extent that people feel that they are I mean, COVID may never go, but flu has never gone. So
No,
I
it's
said
still
before,
going to go. It's something that's going to be part of our society now.
exactly. But if people can feel that getting COVID and dying of it is as less likely or as unlikely as catching flu and dying of it, then I think people will literally go back to normal. I don't know when we'll ever shake hands with anybody again. I've mentioned before, Matt, that you were the last person I shook hands with. I've not shaken hands with anybody since.
That's sad.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anybody since then either. I mean, it was just, I mean, we did that gig, and then I think we were supposed to be going to the Netherlands the following weekend to go and play. All the gear's still in my hallway, ready to go to the Netherlands. And it's like, and I remember at the time talking to the guys in the band, and it was like, oh, this won't affect it now. Nothing to worry about too much. I mean, it looks a bit iffy, but I'm sure it'll be all right.
Yeah, keep your distance. Do the elbow jab instead of shaking hands.
Yeah,
it'll be fine.
and then I saw Carvus, and Carvus said Cruise to the Edge had been cancelled. They were going out with Gong and Steve Hillage in that.
Yeah.
He said that Cruise to the Edge, and I thought, well, that's a bit weird. And I had been following it in the news, but I'd not, Yeah,
you hadn't got the scare.
I hadn't quite got the magnitude of it at that point. It was kind of, I think I was on the lines of, well, I've dealt with cancer. I mean, how hard can this be? And then I kind of realised the scale of it, and I realised the full horror of it. It's heartbreaking that so many people have lost their families, and the amount of people.
It's appalling. Cruise to the Edge, incidentally, is now, as you probably know, they've decided not to run one in 2021 at all. And 2022 is the next one. Same for a lot of gigs, actually, if we've got time for a second or two. I mean, with the first gigs that got cancelled when lockdown happened, or just before, were the sort of March, April, May gigs. And most of them were rebooked for the autumn, September, October, November. As we approach September, they're all going, bob. Keep an eye on my page at the London Prog Gigs. I keep the dates up to date. As they're cancelled and rescheduled. So the September ones were cancelled, rescheduled for maybe spring of next year. And then suddenly people were booking in gigs. I saw big gigs coming up for late 2021, thinking, it's and now I'm seeing gigs being slotted in and booked in for 2022. So there's a whole section of the industry who've gone, no, let's just forget 2021 altogether and go for video. Hopefully something will have happened by then. So,
the first gig we've got March, April next year, and I'm just, we've just got to hope that things improve. I'm always optimistic, and I'm hoping things work. I think we've got Evil Blizzard, we've got a support slot in London, we've got HRH Prog with the mighty Rick Wakeman, he of Countdown fame.
Is that the Leeds one?
I can't remember. It's in Sheffield, I think.
Is it? Oh, yeah, okay. But the one coming up in October, this October.
No, not in October. In the one we're in, the one in.
Okay, next year, 2021 one, yeah.
2021 one, yeah.
I have an idea they moved that one to Leeds because my mates from Hats Off Gentlemen are adequate.
Yeah, it's Rick Wakeman. Can't remember who else he's playing. Pendragon, I think, are playing.
I also run a little group for HRH Guild visitors, by the way, HRH Proggers, if you want to try that one on.
Yeah, so
HRH was one of the festivals that I've been to a couple of times over the years.
Just to briefly, I think we covered. Just the other thing was, what do you think of all the alternatives, like the driving gigs and things like that? Do you think that's feasible? Do you think that's going to be a goer?
It depends what your interest is. When the lockdown happened, I started a Facebook group called Virtual Prog Gigs, and I was doing quite a lot of work bringing people's attention to the virtual gigs that were going on. I have to say that not many people seem to be that interested, and I kind of lost interest a bit myself too, because when you've seen a few people doing home gigs and stuff, you want to support them, but after one or two of them, there's not anywhere else to go.
It's always some bloke in his back bedroom going,
Matt, if it was you, I'd watch you all evening.
Oh,
But you know,
I remember Carvis did a really good one from his front room.
he did. Yes, absolutely. And listen, don't get me wrong. I'm not entirely the fact these guys do it. Jordan Rudess of Dream Theater played every single night for 30 nights in a row. I mean, you know, it was just what a trooper that guy is. But you know, there's the Blank Manuscript have got a gig on at 6 o'clock tonight, where they actually are playing live. And actually, the Chaos Theory guys are doing live gigs from Black Art, our favourite venue, or one of them. So that's a thing that is a lot better when you're actually showing a televised gig. But to me, to be fair, half the enjoyment of a gig is the physically going there, having a couple of pints, meeting a few people I know, having a chat, the whole social aspect of it, and that just doesn't exist. So for me, no, I'm not going to go to a drive-in gig. Why would I? You know, you may as well stay at home and watch this. But some people will, and you know, they are happening. So, you know, if that's all there is, then why
It doesn't
not?
appeal to me, the idea of sitting in a car park watching Top Load or whatever. It's my idea. It's not.
No, but horses for courses. If some people get off on it, then great. You know.
Yeah. I mean, you know, if I can't really foresee a situation where I'd want to do it. Not in a I'm not doing that. I just not for me. And if
play one or go to one, Matt.
I think either really. I think, but as I always say, if it makes somebody happy. Someone said to me the other day, it's like, you know, do you hate tribute bands? I don't hate any bands. I think any band that's, you know, people get into and enjoy, and it brings some joy to somebody, whether it's the person playing or the person listening. I think it's brilliant, because there's not enough joy and love in the world. The world's can be quite a difficult place, and anything that makes somebody happy. And I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, you just listen to 70s prog, because if that's what gives that person a bit of joy in their lives and makes them happy, good, go for it. You go for it, mate. Well, who am I to criticise? So
good for you, Matt. Good man.
That's the attitude to have. You know what I mean? I just want people to be happy. I mean, you know, it frustrates me that I'd like to see music move in different ways and stuff, but I think this life's too short, man. Just joy, bringing the joy. So, in terms of, you know, all that stuff about, you know, as someone who's sort of been observing the prog scene for the last 5 years or so, do you think it's massively changed? Do you think the scene's got bigger, or it's different? What would your observations be over the course of your time doing London Prog gigs and the last 5-10 years?
Well, interesting one. I mean, as I say, as more and more people have discovered social media, more and more people have discovered that there are places to talk to other people about the old bands and stuff. And so that has been absolutely visibly, you know, you can see this happening. You can see the Facebook groups getting bigger. You can see tickets selling out quicker. I mean, hey, when I would see Pink Floyd do the Wall at Earl's Court in 1980. I sent, you know, a check or a postal order off about 8 weeks before and got tickets through the post, and it was fine. These days, you know, the bigger gigs were announced a year in advance, pre-COVID, but and you have to sit and wait at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you know, and your number 1057 in the queue and all of the. Did you try and get Kate Bush tickets? I mean, you know, it's impossible. So whereas modern technology has made everything easier, but because it's easier, it's made it available to everybody, which has meant that it's actually more difficult than it was in the first place.
And what you know, because obviously you go to a lot more shows than I do. Do you see a lot? Is the attendance getting better? Is it worse? Is there too many bands? Is there not enough bands? Is there not enough fans? Isn't too many? You know, what's your thoughts on that?
Predominantly, I can only really speak for London because it's mostly London gigs that I go to. But it does, but I make notes on my phone. I'm one of the phone tappy blokes that irritates people, but I'm always at the back standing at the bar, so I don't disturb anybody. And I often make notes as to how big the audience is and what the sort of average age bracket of the audience is, because I find it interesting. And yeah, you know, you can go and see a King Crimson gig at Hackney or Albert Hall or something, and it's sold out, as you know, the monsters do. But modern prog bands, I have been to so many bands where there's half a dozen paid tickets and the rest of the people in the hall are the support band or the you know, the mums and dads and stuff like that. There have been some terribly badly attended ones. On the other hand, as I mentioned before, I go and see a band that I consider to be in the prog sphere. I don't know, maybe krautrock and psych and stuff like that, and they are packed. They're little venues, 200 people or fewer. But they haven't, and I'm going, where are my prog friends? Why aren't my prog friends at this? Because they mostly don't. They mostly stay with either the original 70s bands or the ones that sound a bit of that sort of area. They don't stray into the prog metal or into the psych. I mean, my particular love I've discovered over the last few years is psych stoner stuff. I mean, it's just me, but you don't see any other old proggers at psych stoner gigs. You see loads and loads of, well, one or two, but you know, seeing how many bald heads you see in an audience is a sort of indication as to what sort of the average age of the group is. And yeah, so it's heartwarming when I went to see the Who. I'm talking about the Who, the HU, the Mongolian band. Not the Who. I am a Who fan from years ago, but that was at the Electric Ballroom. You mentioned that, packed. Nobody over 30. I wouldn't have thought 35, maybe something like that. And you think, well, where are all the guys that have a wide prog and prog related? There's a lot. You know, you go to midweek gigs. You're going to get a lot of people. You're married with kids and a job. Going out to midweek gigs is not easy for most people. So, you know, you've got to take that into account. But you can go to, as I've mentioned before, we're spoiled in London. Every night of the week, there's half a dozen gigs on or more. So there's a lot of people chasing a lot of stuff. How it was building. I think that it's nice to see younger people. I say younger people, I'm talking about people under 40, going to see so many. When both my kids have been through uni, and I don't think they have bands even playing at university campuses anymore. The guys, if they went to see a live band, they might see it in town, but they mostly think of festivals as being places to see bands.
We did a university gig a couple of years ago with Vessels. You know Vessels? Great sort of post-rock band. And
the band. Yeah.
Vessels, and there was hardly anyone there. There was like 30 people, 30, 40 people. And Vessels,
30 or 40 people is a success for some of the bands that we go to these days.
Like Vessels are like, you know, they've worked with Flaming Lips. You know, Dude from Flaming Lips does vocals in their new album, and there's hardly anyone there.
I'm a great believer that post-rock is under the prog umbrella, but not many other people seem to think so.
I think, like the Mogwai, they're into like all the prog stuff. You know, and Barry from Mogwai I talked to quite a bit on Twitter and stuff. And
well, some bands, of course, don't want to be associated with prog, because if you were talking about labels at the beginning of this chat, but if you get too attached to prog as a label, then there is a section of people that will not want to know, and they'll say anything that says prog, not for me.
There's ageism. So some people say they don't want to have an older audience. I think, well, that's just ageism. That's just, you know, that's vile, because basically, you know, it doesn't matter what age people are. There's also an element of snobbishness where people want to be, you know, seen to be the hippest, youngest, coolest thing. And that's fine, but that doesn't last long. I've got mates who are in really, you know, when I first came to London in 2001, 2002, the big things in the pubs was, 2001 or 2000 to 2001 with bands like Libertines, The Darkness. So there's all these sort of hip.
Darkness, yeah.
Yeah, the Darkness were great. And see Darkness in the pub, they were awesome in the pub. You know, they did the same show they did at Hammersmith as they did the same show in a pub. It was unbelievable. They're brilliant. And so, but those bands, they were briefly popular and they had a little audience, but that audience moved on. And a lot of them, you know, they're not, you know, you could, you know, in the early 2000s, you would love to be in a band like Razorlight, I suppose, if you want to be a successful musician. Who remembers Razorlight now, apart from a few hardcore fans? Whereas if you cultivate an audience that stays with you and you treat that audience with respect and treat them well, they're more likely to stay, you know, stay the course, and you can keep making records over a longer period of time. You might not make any money, but you can still keep going and still keep enjoying doing it. And that's kind of what, you know, my goals, it was always just to be able to keep making records and trying to do stuff that I enjoyed doing. So fundamentally, I think, you know, the real thing is to try and cultivate an audience that will stay with you for 10, 20, 25 years. You know what I mean? Look at a band like Cardiacs. You know, we're talking about Cardiacs. Obviously, Tim passed away today, very sadly. But look at a band like that, and you sort of think, well, you know, that audience stayed with them from the 80s through to now, basically. You know, that audience stayed, and I think if you make credible music and you retain that audience, you've won, haven't you? So you're doing, you know, you're in a good position. But yeah, I think the prog thing. I mean, I know Stephen Wilson didn't like being called prog when they were doing Porcupine Tree. I've never bothered if people call us prog or space rock, or we've had stoner rock, prog rock, psych rock, prog metal. We got called the other week, but you can't say we sound like Haken or Dream Theater. We've got none of that. You know that. You know, so we've got nothing in common with a lot of that stuff. I mean, I don't really care what people call us as long as they come and see us. I don't care how old they are. I don't care who they are. As long as they come and as long as they have a good time.
Yeah, I mean, the Fierce and the Dead are the definitive multi-genre band. There's only one genre that is unequivocally describes you: instrumental.
Instrumental, yeah. I mean, I think
that's the only one that you can absolutely say, apart from the certain palm tree. But other than that, there's you know, but pretty much you are very, very rare in covering so many other, and you know, you do draw people from all sorts of it. As you say, prog metal, psych stoner guys, all of that sort of stuff. And your band is very rare in this, though, Matt.
But I think that, like I say, because we haven't got vocals, it's harder to put us into a specific genre. So if we were to get someone like Ross from Haken to sing with us, I think we'd go more into like a prog metal sort of thing. But just because we haven't got any vocals, I mean, I think vocals are kind of something we'd like to add for the next album. So we'll probably get stuck in some genre then, I suppose. But we'll see. But
well, you know, if you're going to progress, one obvious thing you can do is to try some vocals. You know, why not? It doesn't mean to say nothing is necessarily forever.
No, I think that's the thing. I think we're lucky enough to have been going for 10 years now. I think people are used to us putting out a different album every time. The last record brought in a lot of people, but you know, hopefully we'll be able to keep going. Anyway, is there anything? What do you want to plug, Chris? Do you want to talk about London Prog Gigs?
I'm not really a plugger, but if you're in the London area, if you're interested,
and on behalf of all the bands that you've helped to support, I just want to say thank you, Chris, because we do really appreciate it, mate. So thank you so much.
That's really nice of you, Matt. Thanks very much indeed. And that, you know, that is what for me it's all about. I mean, the little bit, the nod they call it. It's nice. it is nice to get that. So thank you.
Make sure I said that because that group has been really, really useful, and you've been very, you know, so obviously I ask you for advice on venues and stuff a lot. So, but thank you so much. It does really appreciate it. And all the bands. You know, it's not us particularly, you know, just us. It's loads of bands have really benefited from that group. How many people are in that group now?
About 1,500.
That's massive. I mean, that's, you know, marketing wise, if that was a marketer's, that's a marketer's dream of 1,500 progressive fans, weird music fans in a group. That's brilliant. So thank you so much, Chris. We do appreciate it.
Well, that's very kind of you, Matt. I do thank you for saying so. But you know, it is genuinely my pleasure.
But yeah, so you got London Prog and you got the HRH Proggers group as well, haven't you?
The HRH Proggers group. Whether the HRH in October will happen or not, I don't think it will. HRH get a certain amount of stick from prog fans, I have to say, and to some extent, maybe rightly, they are known for. Well, I'm not going to say what they're not, but nonetheless, they put on gigs and they put on festivals and they draw people. And a lot of people, will go to these festivals, and like curious this happened with me, they'll reinvigorate their music and they'll buy albums or listen to new music and stuff. So I won't hear anything against them really, insofar as a good job is done.
Yeah, I just to echo that, HRH have only ever been good to us in terms of growing the audience. I think it's always been a good thing, so I can't complain at all. And we've always had good times at the things. I've always, I've had some brilliant times. Apart from I really broke both my arms in Wales. I was going up into our caravan, and I was attempting to climb up through this muddy sort of bank.
Yeah.
Fell back like two bags full of beer in my hand. It's my own fault. Full of beers in my hand. And I slipped. I was wearing old Converse, and it was raining, and I was going up a hill, and I went down. Beer cans flew everywhere. Some of them smashed, broke open, and I broke my wrists. I was so lucky not to break my wrists.
Nasty.
But that's the only bad side I can say of HRH.
Well, that's the thing you're going to remember, isn't it? But as I say, London Prog Gigs and London Prog Gigs Group is my organisation. I do put on one or two gigs, small gigs every so often, or I did do before COVID. I was also a co-promoter of the Prog the Forest Festival, which is a small but growing charity festival. We have it in July. We did do an online version this year, and we raised a dollar for money too for the World Land Trust. So I was very, very happy about that. And as I say, I've got a gig coming up, booked at the Fiddler's Elbow in November, for Blank Manuscript and my mate's Hats Off, Gentleman's Adequate, and a bloke called Tom Slatter. I'm not sure who he is, but
I've heard the name.
On the bill. Whether that's going to happen or not, I do not know. I don't know. What actually bothers me at some point is whether gigs will happen, but I personally will choose still not to go to them. That would be a bit embarrassing. But I have to say, I've been chatting to Mike Morgan too, who had to Mike Morgan from The Gift, who had to cancel his upcoming September Fest one day festival multi-band gig, as to whether, and Mike is in agreement with me that maybe we should be looking for April, May gigs next year, because it is still nearly a year away, and when things happen, things can happen very quickly. We went from coronavirus being a thing they had in China to lockdown in 3 months. And so, 3 months could go from being, the thing that is, there's no real equivalent apart from World War II, really, insofar as the impact on society, I don't think has happened for 60 years. But 3 months could see it. It is possible that it will all, I hate to say a certain person said it could be all over by Christmas, but it is possible. So there are some people that, so anyway, at the moment I am looking to put gigs together for sort of April, May next year. If they don't happen, they don't happen, but they might.
Someone was saying to me, if you don't get them booked in now, the cats come to see me. If you don't get them booked in now, a lot of the venues are going to be booked anyway.
Again, if you go to the London Prog Gigs group and look under files, you'll see a complete list of all the prog and prog-related gigs that are booked for the next 2 years. And the clashes in 2021 are just. This is only London. I'm sorry for non-London viewers, but if everything is okay in a year's time, then how you're going to choose which gigs to go and see is going to be really, really difficult.
I mean, in terms of what I'm thinking, we're going to reschedule the gigs from this year, but we're not booking any new ones. I can't.
Yeah, no, there's an entirely valid decision, mate. But as I say, the other thing I also do have to say is we're assuming, Matt, that all the venues are going to reopen, and who the hell knows if that's going to be true.
I just don't want the worry of it at the moment. I mean, we're going to make a new record, and then when we come back in 2022, 2023, we can start to think about how we're going to continue as a band and, do loads of gigs and enjoy doing it again. But at the moment, I think it's time to reflect and get some new music done and all that. So, right, brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. I can't thank you enough. It's been so nice talking to you, mate.
Absolute pleasure, Matt. Anytime. Look forward to next time.